of our fabulous CroakeyGo walk at Callan Park in Rozelle in Sydney. And I've got Emeritus Professor Stephen Leeder here, who we know a lot about his work in health and public health, but a little bit less about his creative works. And I find this intriguing. I think that we're all sort of encouraged to leave our creativity at the door when we embark on medicine. So I guess I'm a bit interested, Steve, on how you kept the spark and what it does for you.
It's a very interesting question, isn't it? And people have said medical education can be divided into two, not clinical and preclinical, but pre-cynical and cynical.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the homogenisation of medical practice means that it's like joining the army. You ended up wearing a uniform and saluting, and the individuality gets squashed.
Yeah.
Yet, when you think about it, the individuality of patients is such that if you don't retain an interest in understanding people as unique individuals, then bad things happen and they feel uncared for. So, for me, the sort of humanistic motivations behind doing medicine are exactly the same that have led me to feel and sense the importance of maintaining my own creativity at a level that makes me responsive to other people's individuality. It's a complicated way of saying it, but without that, I think you end up following clinical practice guidelines and checking boxes on a computer-based record or something or other, and it's no wonder people who do that get burnt out because they're missing the major human element of medical encounter.
So, can you put a time on when you started writing poetry, or have you always written poetry?
Well, I was basically arrested in high school for writing a parodic poem about one of Joseph Conrad's little books, which was the subject of our English studies at that time. And but the English teacher, to his great credit, read the poem and said, "Well, this is terrific."
Right.
Instead of saying, stand in the corner and count to 1,000 and say, "I must never do this again," he actually encouraged me.
Yeah.
So I suppose in some sense that's part of the early pilgrimage, but I wrote poetry when I was doing medicine, especially a creative year I had in the middle where I was doing a Bachelor of Medical Science degree, and then perhaps a bit later when I was working at Newcastle University, and you were there as a student. So my poetic career has been sort of fits and starts to an extent.
Depending on time and need.
And what space my brain is occupying.
Yeah, it's interesting
because it's a different part of your head that works with poetry.
It's interesting that you mentioned getting arrested for your writing, because I had exactly the same experience, but at Newcastle. So my first GP attachment, I wrote, instead of turning in a proper report, I wrote an account of a couple of very colourful encounters, colourful consultations that the GP I was assigned to had done, and with perhaps not enough objectivity or analysis, and I failed. Yeah, but I was called up to the Professor of General Practice at the time, and we had a bit of a talk, and he asked me a little bit about my stories, and he said that they really were quite amusing. Anyway, at the end of about a 20-minute conversation about general practice and about my stories, he said, "Well, I'm satisfied that you knew what it was about," and he passed me. So I must say I gave up writing creatively in medicine for quite a long time.
Well, that'd be a traumatic experience,
wouldn't it? Yeah. But I think it's interesting. Do you find that things that are hard to process in real time come out in your poetry a little bit? Like sad things that happen with
Oh,
patients?
yeah. And I think, for me, anyway, writing a poem is a fairly unpredictable journey.
Yes.
I don't know what it's going to turn into, or how it'll end.
Yes, yeah.
For example, I was contemplating just the other day the enormity of the deaths in World War I on the Somme and places like that, and I read how ordinary soldiers, their death often took 4 weeks to get to their loved ones, and how it was recorded just on a standard military form. Regret to inform you that so-and-so died, but for officers, not only was their identity protected, whereas for hundreds of thousands who don't know who they were or where they were, but their loved ones received a telegram. And so I thought, inequalities, oh dear, they're there, even.
Yeah.
So I wrote a poem about walking through this territory and how you could possibly trace the contour of someone's face in the soil, and the dreadfulness of this disparity in the way in which people were notified. But I ended it up by saying that it's all very well saying lest we forget, but I tell you what, we will and we do.